In 1896, a team of University of Pennsylvania archaeologists pulled a shattered clay tablet out of the desert ground of southern Iraq. It was roughly the size of a paperback novel. The writing on it was 4,000 years old. They cleaned it, they photographed it, they locked it in a vault in Philadelphia. And then, for over a century, almost no one looked at it. Until 2019, when a computational linguist at the Oriental Institute of Chicago fed its inscription into a new AI-assisted translation system. And what came back made the entire room go quiet. Because what this tablet described wasn't a trade record. It wasn't a king's boast. It wasn't a religious hymn. It was a set of instructions, biological instructions, written in Sumerian, the oldest written language on Earth, describing a process that modern scientists say shouldn't have been possible to even conceptualize for another 3,000 years. This is the story of what they found, what it means, and why the people who decoded it aren't entirely sure they should have. To understand what was decoded in that Chicago lab, you have to go back to where it came from, a place called Nippur. Nippur sits in modern-day Iraq, roughly 150 kilometers southeast of Baghdad. It was once one of the most important cities in the ancient world, not because it was a military powerhouse or a great trading hub, but because it was a center of knowledge. The ancient Sumerians considered Nippur sacred. It was home to Enlil, one of their most powerful gods, and it housed something archaeologists would eventually call the world's oldest library. Between 1889 and 1900, American archaeologists excavated the site in 4 separate campaigns. They pulled out more than 30,000 clay tablets. 30,000! Some were as small as your palm. Others were the size of a large book. Most were covered in cuneiform, the wedge-shaped writing system the Sumerians invented around 3200 BCE, making it the oldest writing system ever confirmed on Earth. Here's the first thing that stops you cold. The Sumerians did not slowly develop writing over generations. According to archaeologist Andrew Lawler, cuneiform appeared in the archaeological record almost fully formed. Within 200 years of its appearance, it was already being used to record complex mathematical formulas, astronomical data, and what appear to be medical procedures. Scientists still don't fully understand how a writing system of that sophistication materialized so quickly. Most of the 30,000 tablets from Nippur were shipped to Philadelphia and Istanbul. Many were cataloged, some were translated. But here's what almost no one mentions. As of 2019, scholars estimate that fewer than 10% of all known Sumerian tablets have been fully translated. 90% of what they wrote, we still cannot read. Think about that for a moment. The oldest written records in human history, and 9/10 of them are still, essentially, sealed shut. What is in those other tablets? The tablet that ended up in Chicago, cataloged as UM 2915709, was one of the ones that slipped through the cracks, damaged, fragmentary, filed away, until a new generation of tools made it possible to see what no human eye had properly read in 4 millennia. And what it said changed the conversation entirely.
Dr. Ilan Markov, a computational linguist specializing in ancient Near Eastern languages, had spent 6 years building what he called a context-aware AI translation model, one trained not just on known Sumerian vocabulary, but on the grammatical structures, metaphorical conventions, and cosmological frameworks that Sumerian scribes used when writing about the natural world. Most ancient language AI tools translate word by word. Markov's system tried to translate meaning by meaning. The difference is enormous. A Sumerian phrase that literally translates as "the blood of the sky gods flows into the black earth" might mean something very specific within their cosmological framework, something that a word-for-word translation would render as poetry, but which in context might be a description of an actual physical process. When his system processed UM 29-15-709, it returned something unprecedented. The tablet, approximately 4,000 years old from the Third period of Sumer, appeared to describe a multi-stage process for what the translation rendered as the shaping of a living vessel. The text referred to combining the essence of the Father and the essence of the Earth Mother in specific proportions, described what appeared to be gestation periods measured in lunar cycles, and included a passage that Markov's system translated as, "The vessel carries within it the pattern of what came before, and the pattern shall repeat." That last phrase stopped the team cold. The pattern shall repeat, in the context of biological reproduction, is a surprisingly accurate description of hereditary genetics. The idea that physical and behavioral traits are passed from parent to offspring through a biological pattern was not formally theorized until Gregor Mendel's work in the 1860s. The molecular mechanism, DNA, was not described until 1953. The Sumerians were writing about it in 2100 BCE.
Now, to be absolutely clear, scientists are not claiming the Sumerians discovered DNA. What they are saying is more unsettling. The Sumerians appear to have had a conceptual framework for hereditary transmission that was, in the words of Dr. Markov, functionally analogous to a pre-scientific theory of genetics. They observed the pattern. They named it. They wrote instructions around it. No one can explain exactly how they arrived at this concept, or why it then disappeared from the historical record for nearly 4,000 years. If they understood heredity, even conceptually, what else did they understand that we haven't decoded yet? But the biological tablet, as extraordinary as it was, turned out to be the second most significant discovery made in that same tranche of re-examined Nippur material. Because when archaeologists cross-referenced it with another set of tablets, the Eridu sequence, something even more staggering came into view. If you've watched this far, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments what country or city you're watching from. Perhaps we'll find something interesting in your country's history and make a video about it. Eridu is important. According to Sumerian texts, Eridu was the first city ever built on Earth. Not just the first Sumerian city, the first city, period. Modern archaeologists excavating the site in southern Iraq found occupation layers dating back to approximately 5400 BCE, making it one of the oldest continuously inhabited urban sites ever confirmed. When the Sumerians wrote their version of creation, the Eridu Genesis, they placed the origin of civilization there, at a specific set of coordinates in the marshlands of southern Mesopotamia. The Eridu Genesis tablets, first translated in the 1910s by Arno Pobel, predate the biblical book of Genesis by at least 1,500 years. They describe a great flood. They describe the gods deliberating over the fate of humanity. They describe a single righteous man, called Ziusudra, being warned to build a vessel and preserve life. The parallels to Noah's Ark are not coincidental and not disputed. Most biblical scholars now openly acknowledge that the Genesis flood narrative is derived, at least in part, from Sumerian sources. But the re-examined Eridu tablets, a subset of 11 fragments held in Istanbul's Museum of the Ancient Orient, newly digitized and processed in 2021, contained something that had never been properly read. A passage describing what the translators called the descent of the Me. The Me, pronounced May, were in Sumerian theology the sacred laws and divine powers that governed all aspects of civilization: kingship, priesthood, descent into the underworld, the scribal arts, music, the crafts. They were considered not metaphors, but actual objects, divine tablets that contained the source code of reality. The newly translated passage described the Me not as spiritual abstractions, but as physical records, specific, innumerable, storable. It listed 94 of them. Researchers had previously identified about 60 from other sources. The new tablets added 34 previously unknown entries to the list. Entry number 67, never before seen, translated as the record of the shape of the world before the water came, a pre-flood cartographic record, kept by a civilization we are only now beginning to understand. Scientists still don't fully understand what geographical knowledge the Sumerians actually possessed, or where it came from. They had no aerial observation, no satellite imaging, no ocean-crossing vessels that we know of. And yet, their astronomical calculations were accurate enough that modern NASA engineers have used Babylonian eclipse records, which derived from Sumerian originals, to calibrate the long-term deceleration of Earth's rotation. They were watching the sky, measuring it, recording it, for thousands of years before we thought to ask why. Now we get to the part that the researchers involved have been careful, very careful, about how they discuss publicly. The Lamassu were the great guardian figures of Mesopotamian architecture, massive stone hybrids, the body of a bull or lion, the wings of an eagle, the face of a man, that stood at the gates of Assyrian and Babylonian palaces and temples. They were not decorative, they were protective, apotropaic, meaning they were believed to ward off evil and chaos. What most people don't know is that Lamassu figures were inscribed, not just with standard dedicatory texts, but with what Assyriologists have long called guardian formulas, complex cuneiform inscriptions that ran across the body of the figure, often in locations that were structurally hidden once the statue was installed. You had to know where to look. The Oriental Institute in Chicago holds one of the largest Lamassu figures in the Western Hemisphere, a 16-ton, 3-meter-tall bull colossus removed from the palace of Sargon II at Khorsabad in 1929. It dates to approximately 710 BCE. In 2019, a conservation team performing routine laser cleaning of the statue's surface discovered something that had been invisible under a century of museum dust and oxidation: a secondary inscription layer. Written beneath the outer dedicatory text in an older dialect of cuneiform that predated the Assyrian period by several centuries, possibly Sumerian in origin, was a 200-glyph inscription running along the inner curve of the left wing. The inscription took 2 years to fully photograph and another year to partially translate. What it described was a warning. Not a generic divine warning, a specific one. It described, and here the translation team has used the phrase, with unusual technical precision, a sequence of events that would follow the opening of the sealed record. It listed environmental disruptions. It listed social collapse indicators. It listed what one researcher described as a cascading failure of the systems that hold civilization in order. And then, in the final 12 glyphs, it listed a timeline. The timeline is expressed in terms of Sumerian astronomical cycles, specifically in units tied to the 3,600-year orbital period of a celestial body the Sumerians called Nibiru. Scholars disagree intensely about what Nibiru actually referred to: Jupiter, a hypothetical distant planet, or a purely mythological construct. But when the timeline expressed in the Lamassu inscription is converted using the most widely accepted astronomical interpretation, it places the final event in the sequence within a window that includes the present century. Scientists still don't fully understand whether this represents a genuine predictive framework, the product of thousands of years of longitudinal observation, or whether it is coincidence, confirmation bias, or translation ambiguity. What they do know is that a civilization that accurately predicted solar eclipses, mapped the stars with naked-eye precision, and conceptualized hereditary biology 4,000 years before modern science, that civilization left a warning, and they hid it inside a stone bull. In Chicago, when a culture that understood the sky, the body, and the shape of the world before recorded history leaves you a message, do you read it? Or does that make you responsible for what it says? Here is what we know. In southern Iraq, in a strip of land between 2 rivers, a civilization emerged roughly 6,000 years ago. They invented writing. They mapped the sky. They built cities. They created law. They generated a body of knowledge so vast that 30,000 of their tablets still sit in museums, largely unread. And now, because of computational linguistics, artificial intelligence, and laser archaeology, we are finally, slowly, beginning to read what they actually said. What we're finding is not the primitive superstition we expected. It is not myth dressed up as fact. What we are finding looks, in places, like a civilization that understood things, deeply, systematically, that we thought were modern discoveries. They understood heredity. They understood celestial mechanics. They understood that knowledge could be lost, and they took extraordinary measures to preserve it. Inside stone figures, beneath outer inscriptions, in tablets filed under the wrong categories in 19th century museum archives. They were trying to tell us something. And here is the thought that doesn't let you sleep. We almost didn't listen. We spent 100 years walking past their message every single day in a museum in Chicago, and we never thought to look under the surface. History has a way of humbling us. Every generation believes it has finally arrived at understanding. Every generation discovers, eventually, that it was standing on top of something it hadn't dug down far enough to see. The Sumerians are not a warning from the past. They are a mirror. And when you look at what they built, what they knew, what they preserved, what they hid, the question that should keep you up at night is not, how did they know all of this? The question is, what did they know that we still haven't found? If you've watched this far, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments what country or city you're watching from. Perhaps we'll find something interesting in your country's history and make a video about it.